Yama. This is welcome in Gamilaroi, the language of the people on the land I grew up in northern New South Wales. My name is Ellen Forsyth. I work at the State Library of New South Wales. And like many of my State Library colleagues and some of you, I'm still working off-site. Welcome to this wider local studies session. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which each of us are on and where our libraries stand. We pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and we pay respect to extend that respect to other First Nations people. We celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal cultures and languages across Australia. As well, we acknowledge the contribution that people of many nations have made to this country. In the chat, which you'll find at the right-hand side of the screen, it would be great if you haven't already done so, if you could let us know your name, library including state or territory, and the name or the names of the traditional owners of the traditional custodians of the land that your library is on. A few housekeeping points. For much of this, we'll be asking people to have their video muted and their speakers muted as well. This is mainly so that the speakers are not distracted because there will always be someone with background noise that doesn't realise they're the one with the background noise, or that we can hear exactly what their colleagues are saying. I can mostly mute people, but sometimes I can't. Please ask questions in chat, and this way the speakers can see them after they've stopped screen sharing. If you have any technical questions or you're having trouble hearing it, just message me. I'll be showing up as Ellen. And we'll be using chat mostly for the discussion this afternoon, although it might be times when it's just easier for people to put their microphones on. We'll just have to see how we go with the numbers. This first section has 3 presentations about different ways people have been collecting information during this continuing time of COVID-19. I'll firstly hand over to Mark Gilbert from the State Library of South Australia, who'll be talking about to recollect and how they've been using social media to promote it. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Ellen. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you.
I'm just going to try and share my screens. For those of you who don't know me, I never used Blue Jeans before, but Ellen took me through it the other day, so hopefully I can make it work okay. So it won't be a moment. Google Chrome. And our digital collections page. So really I'll just go through kind of what were our thoughts when we started thinking about what we were going to do here at the State Library of South Australia to reflect the whole issue of COVID and closures and lockdowns and all that sort of thing that we experienced back in March. I do apologise to particularly our good friends in Victoria, because we have been relatively open since June. The library itself closed in between about the end of March and early June, and we opened again here at the library in June 9th. So there will be some things that are a little bit different perhaps to other places, but we'll just head on. So when the idea for reflecting what was going on during COVID came in a bit of a funny way. It was suggested by a member of our marketing team that we start up a social media page, particularly a Facebook page specifically, that where people who weren't able to come into the library anymore, because we were closed obviously, could reflect on the changes that they were undergoing, and post things on the Facebook page, discuss things, ask us questions. We had different ways of where people could access the library. We stayed open online, if I could put it that way. But I'm a librarian, so I work with the marketing team quite closely. But as a librarian, the first thing I thought, of course, was how are we going to capture the material that's on social media for the collections going forward. And I'm sure that was a challenge for all of us. Social media is one of those things, of course, that comes and goes from day to day. And I'm basically responsible for the social media here at the State Library. But as I say, being a librarian, my focus was to try and make sure that we had material that was then going to be added to the collections for the future. I won't say our marketing officer necessarily understood that off the bat, but he came along with us on that. So it was very much a joint effort between our marketing team, members of our archival team, and what we call online services as well, because online services were the team that manages our Recollect or digital collections. We kind of call it digital collections for a public face, but the Recollect product that we've been using here at the library for a couple of years, and you can see just our home page of the Recollect page there with things flashing all over the place. So it was decided to use that because we needed to do something quickly, obviously, so we already had this product there, and we used it to put on our digital collections, things about like South Australia Illustrated and the Ross and Keith Smith, so perhaps more traditional material for us to put on there. We'd promote our exhibitions on there as well. But the important thing for us was how to get the Recollect database to work for the public and for us at the same time. So from the start, we were promoting the Facebook page, and then as we were doing that, we were telling people that the digital collections page was coming, and to be prepared for that, and encourage them to get ready to upload material to it. Just as a bit of background now, we've received about 250 community photographs, videos, music, audio, community stories, and we'll go into the page. I just got to open up the top here from when I've logged in as well, so we can get a better look at it. So it was decided to call the page Remember My Story. And there's all this background here where people can add photos, add videos, add stories. I'll talk a bit about some of the limitations and perhaps issues we have in just a moment, but I'll just go through a little bit of what we have on this, so you can see it's our main job was to collect the material, but also to make it as easy as possible for us to then reuse it. So I'll talk about that a bit in a second as well. But let's have a look a bit at some of the material that we've collected. It was part of a bit of a concerted effort. Staff were taking photos already with a view to adding them to the collection, and so we would be uploading staff photos to this as well. Hopefully it loads pretty quick. Sometimes it can load a bit slowly. Also, we wanted some material that would be there for when people started to upload their own material, so they could see the sorts of things that were there. And largely the material that people uploaded were photographs. So often it was people walking around their local area, like a lot of us were doing when we were working from home, making sure we were getting out. You can see there's also some material from country places in South Australia. Beautiful borough there. There's all sorts of material here that's some of it is amusing, such as this one. 3D Radio is a community radio station here in Adelaide. So this is what they were promoting in their shelves where they kept all their CDs and things. So they uploaded that to us. Artworks. And the other thing it does as well, my wife says I'm the world's worst photographer, but I did take some photographs and upload them to the system because I wanted to get some stuff there quickly. We were fortunate in Adelaide that the local league, SANFL, could start in late June, so they had games at Adelaide Oval where people could spread out because there were limits on numbers. But why I wanted to point this out, apart from the fact that my team won that day, is that you could also upload multiple images. So you've got this large image there, and this is just going into the ground. Obviously you can zoom in, and that's when you'll see my photography is a bit fuzzy, but and people could also download these images as well. Anzac Day, of course, as it was all over Australia, was a bit strange. The building you see behind there is actually the State Library, so we're across the road from the National War Memorial here in Adelaide. And I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine who works for the ABC, who was doing the dawn service, took some photographs, and I encouraged him to upload those as well, because normally, of course, there'd be people right across North Terrace and Kintore Avenue there, but unfortunately they couldn't be there on the day. Lots of photographs of signage, playgrounds being closed. Campgrounds, food courts, some quite beautiful photos as well. You'll see this one here where taken by a professional photographer, which we did have a number of professional photographers get in touch with us about uploading material, and they'd gone through Adelaide in particular during the close down, showing the empty streets and so forth. So it was decided, instead of having them go through the process of uploading images individually, that we got in touch with them and get their collections kind of in bulk. There's a poster that you might have seen too. Peter Drew is a South Australian, and he has been sending these posters all over the world together soon enough, particularly all over Australia, of course, and this was one of the first that got stuck up at one of my local places of visitation. But this one's also some amusing stuff. This is a kind of a gift shop in the city, Tangerine Fox in Pulteney Street, and the sign there caught my eye where it said, "Due to the zombie-less apocalypse." So we're trying to reflect the seriousness of it, but also the way people, kind of dealt with it in an amusing way as well. And again, I'll show you. Don't think we'll be seeing those petrol prices again very soon. Photos from all over the place, including this one, which is a couple of photographs of a hotel I've known to visit down in Theberton, and they set up their business for takeaways where people can order at one window and then pick up at a next window. So this photo was actually used in quite a few media articles, and it got quite a bit of traction, I'm pleased to say. Another nice object that has been donated to us. Pardon me. Which I only discovered today when I was getting ready to come in, is we had a heading called Stories, so people were sharing poems and poetry and so forth, and it was only today when I was looking that I discovered that someone had done a comic strip as well related to COVID. So, as with a lot of things that when we're dealing with the public, we obviously want to make the interaction between us and them as simple as possible. So we had to devise guidelines and instructions for the submission of written documents, video, photographs, audio recordings, and obviously our most important thing is to provide a way of them agreeing to giving us ownership, access and reuse of the material that they are uploading to the site. We've done that to an extent using Flickr in the past, but because of the nature of what we were trying to get here, not just photographs, but all sorts of other formats, we decided to go with Recollect. So that was the main challenge, because in the end, the limitations within the product itself proved there wasn't really much flexibility in the back end, particularly in relation to ensuring the right copyright conditions. And we found that it's not very customizable as well, if that's a word, but you understand what I mean, I'm sure. We also hope to make the submission as automated as possible. So I'll just go to that. Hopefully it won't take too. Sometimes I did find when I was working from home and trying to upload images, it could be a bit flaky. I don't know if that was my connection at home. I'm still don't have the NBN. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, to be honest, but I still don't have NBN from home. But it could sometimes take a while just to upload one digital photograph. Other people weren't necessarily having the same problems as me. So I'll just put in yes there. I won't bother choosing a file, but you can see the sort of statement. So we didn't want anything except either when it came to I confirm that, we could have both those radio buttons, that was okay, but we certainly didn't want the last two buttons there. We basically wanted people to agree that there was, open access for everyone who saw these photographs. But my friend and colleague who was working in our online services team, who really did the hard work on this, said it really wasn't possible. She wanted the Creative Commons, open access, all those sort of things that we found that we just couldn't do. And it was a bit frustrating for her in particular at this early stage not to be able to get that. So that's been a bit of a problem with the Recollect. And it would do odd things that when people were reading a copyright statement, it would sometimes default to the New Zealand copyright statement. As some of you may know, I'm sure most of you know, that Recollect's a New Zealand product. So a little bit of flakiness there. But from what she told me at the time, it seemed to be that we were pushing it in directions that it hadn't been before. So that's kind of a bit understandable as well. So also the bulk upload, you can upload actually a stack of images. So if you tried to upload, maybe 10 images of anything, it could be a little bit flaky. Again, that might have been just the bandwidth. So a lot of the time, once an image was uploaded, some of us had to then really manually monitor the submissions every day in order to approve the photographs, add the metadata, and even things like rotate some photographs, that even though you're sitting at home and you're uploading a photograph and it looks fine, when it actually goes live onto the site, it seems as though it appears upside down. So we would have to, particularly portrait ones, oddly, so we would have to go in and then just spin it around. And again, it wasn't one of those things where it happened straight away, like in real time. It would sometimes take a while. So you'd think you hadn't done it right, and invariably you've spun it around too far. So there's these little things that could frustrate you in it. It was quite time intensive to set up, and particularly monitor in those first few weeks, like anything with this sort of thing. And it did have a bit of media attention, which I'll show you in a second. But it was that initial flurry over those first couple of months where everyone was kind of focused on COVID, I suppose, in a very it was all central to what was happening in their lives at the time. So they were keen to reflect that in all those sort of ways, those different formats that we were after. It was very, as I say, time sensitive, and we're working from home, but it was it was also the quickest way we had to be able to make a dent in that idea of collecting what was going on almost in real time. Otherwise, I suspect we would have not been very successful in getting any material at all. We are also talking, and we do have the ability to for people to upload audio files, and someone has done that and uploaded a song that he sang about it. But in terms of oral history, in terms of a formal sort of process for oral history, we've decided to really wait on that. We were in a bit of state of flux at the time. Our oral historian had left, and of course no one was employing because of all the processes involved. It kind of happened all at the wrong time. So it was decided to really put that off, because oral history is usually better done when people have had time to reflect on the whole thing. And it's that idea of dealing with people who are perhaps homeless, and people who are having to return home when they were allowed to South Australia from other places, where they've lost their jobs and so forth. So it's been decided that we'll actually have a focused oral history project later on in the piece. The other thing that was a bit of a gap for us, there was a bit of push and pull between our archival team and our education team, who were very keen to have the schools and teachers involved in this, school projects and so forth, children being represented. And even though children are represented, with parents uploading maybe material that they've taken with their kids playing or being at home, we wanted stuff generated by children themselves, and obviously that involves all sorts of permissions and so forth. So we decided to go a separate way, with Flickr being used for that, where teachers can bulk upload material all at one hit, 30 kids in a class, so they need that facility, and Recollect just doesn't do that. So we did have, close a few windows here.
Excuse me, Mark, there was a question that came through asking if you accepted all the items that were uploaded, or was there a selection process?
There's going to be a selection process with what's going to be uploaded to the collection proper, if that makes sense. We'll keep the Remember My Story page though, so the content won't be lost in a sense. But if the photographic curator, perhaps if I take it on board, looks at my photos, they're not necessarily the greatest quality in the world. So she might not want to upload those to the collection as such. So we did get some nice publicity about it, and there's Jake again from the Wheat Sheaf. People were very interested in it, and because as I'm sure we all found, it was a brand new thing. Channel 7 came in and shot a story and linked it back to the flu epidemic after World War One. So there was a lot of interest. There was a lot of flurry with it initially. It has kind of quietened down since, and it's going to be interesting to know if indeed South Australia does get a second wave itself. Will people be maybe as interested in documenting their lives, or will it get to the point where they're over it, for want of a better word? I'm sure we'll all be over it, but we'll keep promoting it. And even though Recollect has been not perfect, it was the way we had to go, and it kind of worked. If you're going to say you were satisfied with it, you'd probably give it maybe a 75 to 80% satisfaction rate. So I just thought I'd finish with this one here, which was uploaded by called Linda Kennedy, whose daughter was the girl guarding the pantry against ISO eating. It seems that her father was prone to be nipping into the pantry quite a bit and eating too much, so her daughter decided to guard the pantry against her dad. So that's a bit of a fun picture that just shows people trying to make the best of a difficult situation. And luckily we could share it. And some of these things, you know, people would upload to the page, and then I'd happily share it on our social media. And you know, people really get a kick out of that being shared on our social media, as well as the enjoyment people got of seeing how other people were dealing with things as well. So that's kind of it for me, Ellen, if that's okay.
That sounds great. Does anyone else have any questions for Mark? And also, I've got a question: of any of the other people who are using Recollect been using it in this way?
I'm not hang on. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I accidentally
I'm
muted
in
you.
Kingston in southeast Melbourne, and obviously we're still in quarantine, working from home. So we're still trying to get submissions. So part of my issue now is working out how to organise the submissions. I've had poems, I've had artwork, and I've had lots of pictures. So I'm just in the process of getting to that second part of organising the submissions. So this is interesting for me to see.
That's good. Any other questions or comments for Mark? I think it looks fabulous, and you've got some great photographs, and I like the way that people were obviously taking them as they were going around their restricted daily lives.
Yeah, it's, you know, people felt some real ownership, apart from maybe the COVID, and it's just a thought that I've had in the last little while. It also helped promote what the library does. We sold it in a bit of a way that we're, saving this material for posterity, just like we did, photograph albums of the flu epidemic, that sort of thing. It's a different way of doing it, sure, but it's the same basic principle. So I think people kind of understood that, and even though people, some people might not think of the State Library believe it or not, they might not think of the State Library in their day-to-day lives. Actually, it was a good promotion for the library as well, in a funny way.
A couple more questions have come through. One from Cyprian. What percentage of uploaders added metadata for their images? And how much metadata did they need to add?
It was very basic, to be honest. They had to I can quickly show you if I can get back to that screen. They could add subjects. They had to link it to a story. There was a drop-down box, but some of it was very basic. Let's put that in. I think that's required. And so yeah, and it's under this tell us a few extra details. You can see down the side. So photographer, contributor. So I uploaded some photographs that my daughter took, but gave her the credit, of course. Title, date taken, description, story, trying to point it in those sort of directions. Could put in a location, not everyone did, particularly people who are perhaps uploading photographs that they've taken from home, of course, they didn't add in a location. Tags and subjects, and see if that gives us a bit of a, whoops. So there might be subjects like that, but you could also put in, comic books or signage, that sort of thing as well. But then at our end, once we'd looked at it, I'd be happily adding, perhaps more proper subject headings. What I didn't actually talk about, and one of our people in online services was at pains to point this out to me. We've got this the database here, but she's a little bit concerned with just how much manual input's going to be when we try and download the images directly into our catalogue. So we'll see how that goes.
And one more question. You answered part of this, but I'll ask it all because there's a second part. Will you leave this up for future uploads when this crisis is over? And do you see using the platform for other events?
I think we will be leaving it up, and I still, because now that we've done this, it'll be a shame not to keep it going for other ways as a way for people to upload their material to us. As I said, we have like a Flickr page where photographers can upload their stuff, but this is a different sort of thing. It's a bit more community based than, say, NED, I suppose. So when it comes to other events, our manager of archival services, who would have been here if she wasn't, she sees that opportunity for this to be used in other sorts of events. I mean, this is obviously a major event which really triggered us to do something that maybe we could have been doing before for other, maybe not so quite important events. So I think it will be a tool that we can use in the future. It does impact on, like all of these things, impacts on workflows and so forth. So that does have to be factored into things. But I think it's as a good a tool as we've got here at the State Library of South Australia as at the moment, and there might be better tools in the world, and there might be better tools down the pipeline, but just at the moment, this is what we'll continue to use.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think it looks great, and I'll definitely be exploring more of the submissions later on. Please join me in thanking Mark.
Thank you, Ellen.
And now go over to Bronwyn Miller from Richmond Tweed Regional Library. That's on the north coast of New South Wales in Byron Shire Council. Over to you, Bronwyn. Thank you.
Hi, Ellen. I'm just switching over to my screen now. You should have me soon.
We're still only seeing it as a grey screen.
It's coming.
Nope.
Just loading.
Yep. We're seeing it now. Thanks.
I'm not seeing it though. I'm not in presenter mode. Aha, here we are. Okay, so you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we're good to go. Thanks, Ellen, and hello to everybody. On the 3rd of April 2020, I walked around the town of Byron Bay at 11 a.m. on a beautiful sunny day, and I captured a town suddenly and spookily reduced to a ghost town. Byron Bay was in lockdown due to a visitor pandemic called COVID-19 that had come to town, a scene that locals found surreal, and long-term residents were reminded of the quiet town from back in the 1970s. To understand the impact of these photos for everyone who doesn't know much about Byron Bay, this is normally a town that never stops. Every weekend there's something going on, major festivals, heaps of international backpackers, domestic tourists, day trippers, and the roads are quite often in gridlock. Just finding my... This is the iconic beach hotel with a beer garden that looks out over to the main beach. Originally built and owned by John Cornell and Dalveen Delaney in 1990, and it's changed hands twice since then. This hotel is always busy by 11:30 a.m, but not this day. This is the beach hotel's Johnson Street entrance, with a chalkboard sign simply saying that the beach hotel is now closed, and a community notice that gives a date promising to reopen when it is safe to do so. This is a photo of the busiest chemist in town that was letting one person in at a time and checking temperatures, insisting on hand sanitizing, and then walking around with you and doing your shopping for you. These were the shelves at Woolworths where there used to be pasta. The railway-friendly bar, affectionately known as the Rails, another iconic pub, Always full of people, live music every night. One of the 2 hotels in town owned by Tom Mooney, a former Manly rugby league player and a well-loved publican. The pub was established from what was originally the refreshments area to the south of the platform. Tom and his wife bought the hotel in the 1980s when the train used to come through. The trains have gone, but no one ever really expected the people to be gone too. This surf shop sits on the corner of a busy intersection in town. It's quiet looking down Fletcher Street and it's quiet looking down Lawson Street. A beautiful day on Main Beach looking towards the Cape, 11 a.m. and 1 person on the beach. Main Beach looking north with 2 people on the beach. This is a sign outside the surf club. We were all still getting used to this new concept of social distancing. This is the beach in front of the surf club, just empty. The empty car park looking up onto the empty Belongil Beach. This car park is always packed and it's well known as a place of illegal street camping, with travellers in vans and drumming circles happening every night at sunset. There's dancing, gathering, hugging. Byron Council was swift to close this car park when it became clear that voluntary social distancing was not being taken on board. These sorts of signs were put up in the parks around the beaches. This is the main street of Johnson Street, up near the beachfront. This is another quiet roundabout. This is the centre and the pulse of town, the corner of Johnson Street and Lawson Street, looking like a very quiet country town. Lawson Street, empty, with plenty of parks across the road. This is the Ferros Arcade and the middle of town in Johnson Street, completely empty. The library steps are usually busy. We have about 600 to 800 people through the doors each day, and this roundabout is on the way to the lighthouse. It's always busy and often in gridlock. Library closure sign and the view from our local studies room. This is where I work during the closure, looking out day after day onto the empty roundabout. This is the Byron Bay Library staff social distance. This is us making her resignation as a position of branch technician. From left to right, we have Katie Brown, Andrea Steenbrenner, Nina Hamilton, Brenda Anderson, myself, Bronwyn Miller, and Kate Crisp. So the next part of my presentation is the oral history project that I did during the closure, where I interviewed staff about how they were feeling about the library being closed. So I've just got a presentation, I'll just read on. The staff at the Byron Shire Library have been involved in a COVID-19 oral history project, with myself, Library Assistant Bronwyn Miller, coordinating the project. The State Library of New South Wales very helpfully sent through some generic questions that generated very different answers in different individuals. Our mix of interviewees contained different ranks of staff, one multicultural perspective, and another whose family were directly involved in the regional medical response. We all shared about the process of shutting down from a personal and professional point of view. How we felt, what it was like in the library without the public, in the streets, on the beaches during this most unusual time. So these recordings will be catalogued along with a photograph of each participating staff member. I completed the oral history training in 2016, and although I was really inspired to build a great new collection, it was really difficult to find the time. So this was a great opportunity for me to really gain experience and confidence behind the microphone asking the questions. When I asked each staff member what it was like in the weeks and the days leading up to the lockdown, many were worried because of the number of international visitors that we get through the door each day, especially watching the world and the situation unfolding in Italy and then in Spain and then in the UK. Brenda Anderson, our area librarian of the Byron Shire, said that she felt a heightened sense of responsibility and that she was genuinely worried about how she could keep her staff, and the public safe. The decision to close was about a week before the rest of the state shut down. Regional Library Management met with our area councils, and Byron Shire Council was very strong about the need for us to close our libraries. Brenda said that she felt a great sense of relief and support, and that it was the right decision to make. So all of the RTRL branches closed on the 17th of March 2020. However, we wanted to continue to come to work, and we all had vulnerable people in our lives. So early on, we made a commitment to each other that it's not just about what we do at work, such as social distancing and being vigilant. It's what we do outside work as well that counts. I interviewed Helen East from Mullumbimby branch, who is not pictured here, about the lead up to the closure at Mullumbimby, and Helen was saying that the Mullum branch was already closed for major renovations. They closed about halfway through the week before, but even before they closed, there was tension in the air. So we'll just have a quick listen to Helen.
Excuse me, Bronwyn, that sound doesn't seem to be coming through.
Okay, you're not getting any sound.
No,
Oh,
well,
that's a
no.
shame. Oh, is it really quiet?
Well, I had my microphone, my sound up to 100, and and I was just hearing kind of like whooshy stuff.
Okay. Just stop it for a sec. Yeah. This one. So press it. There. Let's just go here to this one. Is that any better, Ellen? No.
No, I'm still not hearing it. Are other people
Oh,
hearing
that's
it?
a shame. That's a shame. I've got these really nice sound bites from everybody from the old histories that I took, but it looks as though they're not coming through PowerPoint as successfully as I thought they would.
Well, you'll just have to catalog them and send us the link.
I will. I apologise about that. So that's okay. I will just read on with the presentation and summarise what was said. Basically, Helen there at Mullumbimby is talking about that there was tension in the air at Mullumbimby branch before the library actually closed, with patrons almost coming to blows over differences of opinions. And the other issue that Helen raised that she was concerned about that came out in the oral history recording that I did with her was that she was quite concerned about Mullumbimby as a community due to the fact that there's lots of anti-vaxxers and a great deal of conspiracy theory people in town, and she wondered, how compliant they were going to be to the whole social distancing, etc. So that was something that concerned her. I also had a great little recording from Andrea, who's second from the top left. And Andrea, she was particularly concerned about what was unfolding in Europe because she had an elderly mother in Austria. And Andrea went on to say that her mother had to go into complete lockdown, and that her mother was really frightened because of all the hoarding and all the restrictions and everything reminded her of the war, just after the war, and it brought back a lot of fear for this elderly woman, and that was a very good recording that Andrea made as well. And then we were talking about Nina. So I asked Nina. Nina's pictured here. She's third on the top left, from the top left. And when I asked her what scared her and what has inspired her during this time, she spoke about her brother being the anaesthetist at the Lismore Base Hospital, and his job was to set up the COVID clinic. And Nina was really concerned because he's the guy that had the job. When people need oxygen in the middle of this, it's the anaesthetist who's most at risk. And at that time, there was such a shortage of PPE equipment that was a genuine anxiety for her family. So her brother's partner, who is French, she downloaded a 3D printing program that was going around the medics in France and she went to Bunnings and she bought some plastic visor that would go around here, and she actually printed out the 3D mask that clipped across here. And anyway, she managed to produce these fantastic medical masks, which she supplied to the hospital. Turns out the hospital had enough because our crisis was luckily averted. But then she went and supplied them to all the local medical practices, to patient nurses, to the local dentists. There was a small article in the paper about Nina's brother's partner, and just, you know, the sheer ingenuity of the whole thing. And then the other thing I was talking about next is that Nina actually really inspired me, because one of the things that I found inspiring was Nina, because Nina went out and bought herself a sewing machine, and she taught herself to sew, and she spent all her spare time sewing masks, first for people she knew who were vulnerable, but then eventually to everyone she knew, including all her co-workers and their families. So that was an amazing effort. So interestingly, when I've been listening back on all these interviews and looking over the photos, they already feel like history, because at the time our mindset was so focused on flattening the curve and surviving the first wave. At the time, we had no idea that there would be a second wave in Victoria, and no idea that we would be so extremely lucky here in the Byron Shire. And here we are in September, still unable to predict when life will return to normal. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. A question that's come through is, you are planning on cataloguing the photographs and adding them to the collection?
Yes. Yes, that's right. We are going to do that. When we wanted to collect around the concept of the COVID closure, we thought, oh, you know, there'll be heaps of stuff online and we can get stuff here and there. But then I thought, no, I'm better off going out myself and taking the photos myself, so that we have ownership of them and we can use them however we want. So we will be making a catalogue record of them, and we will be. What we usually do with our photos is we digitalize them onto we just keep them on a hard drive at the moment.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. And when you get the oral histories able to be listened, please send the links around, because it would be great to be able to hear
I
them.
will, yeah. My apologies about that. I'm a bit
No,
disappointed, but yeah.
that's completely fine. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. It was great hearing what was happening in your community and how you were managing to collect. So thank you. Please join
That's
me
right.
in
You're
thanking
welcome.
Bronwyn. And now we
Thanks
move
very
to
much,
regional
Alice.
Queensland.
Hello.
And big thanks to Anne Shue at the State Library of Queensland for getting in touch with Jamie Lee Prow, Community Development Officer from Blackall-Tambo Regional Council. Over to you, Jamie Lee. Thank you.
Firstly, I just want to thank both the New South Wales and the Queensland State Library for taking interest and valuing our little small outback town COVID initiative. Firstly, I'll just go to my screen share. Can I take over, Bronwyn? Is that all right? Can everyone see my screen?
Not almost. Yes.
Yeah, you can see it. Wonderful. So I thought, just to kick off, I'd give you all a little fun snapshot of where exactly Blackall is. And I work for the Blackall-Tambo Regional Council, so that covers 2 communities in outback Queensland. We're almost sort of smack bang in the heart of the state. And so Blackall and Tambo are 2 gorgeous little outback towns nestled on the banks of the Barcoo River, and are both filled with fascinating history, world records, art and spirit. So Blackall actually holds the world record for shearing, which was set in 1892 in Blackall by blade shearer Jackie Howe, where the infamous Jackie Howe singlet originates from, and he shore 321 sheep in 7 hours and 40 minutes by hand. And of course, Tambo, the little town itself, is famous for the Tambo teddy, which is crafted from 100% Aussie wool. Blackall was one of the first Queensland towns to sink an artesian bore back in 1885, and even to this day, both our Blackall and Tambo community, like our town water supplies, come from the Great Artesian Basin, and that has been a godsend in this 8-year-long drought. We have not run out of water thanks to that. The saying "beyond the black stump" originated in Blackall when pioneers were passing through town, and they described everything west of the township as beyond the black stump. We are also the home to the last remaining steam-driven wool scour in Australia, and it is now one of our biggest tourist attractions. We also hold the world record for the highest goat jump, which was set in Blackall in 1905 by 14-year-old Roy Dunn and his goat Nugget, jumping 1.07 metre hurdles. So yes, goat jumping was an actual thing. And Blackall was also the original home to the soldier and grazier Edgar Towner, a recipient of the Victoria Cross for his gallantry efforts during World War I. And while his sister Greta Norman Towner was also a decorated servicewoman and nurse during the war. And I think State Library Queensland actually showcased their story once upon a time. So that's just some fast facts about us. The COVID Chronicles. So to give you a little bit of a background into the initiative, I actually started in the role as Community Development Officer the week before COVID lockdown and restrictions were in force. And I guess at that point, I began to understand the depth of the situation in terms that it was going to become a major global crisis. But I also realised that even all the way out here in outback Queensland, we were to some extent going to feel its effects, and I felt this needed to be captured at the time. So the why, as to why I done this, essentially it was a knee-jerk reaction and by no means methodological in any planning. I sort of came up with the concept and thought I'd run with it. My job as CDO is to grow community engagement and connection, and at the time I had to obviously think outside the box as to how I was still going to achieve these outcomes during COVID, and that's basically how the concept came about. So knowing my community, I thought it was extremely important to remain connected as possible during the uncertainty, and like the rest of the world, I saw the biggest way to achieve that was through virtual technology and social media. So I wanted to interview locals from all different cross sections of our community and capture their lived experience, and then share that on our social media portal of our Neighbourhood Centre page. So we got around to all different sections of the community and individuals, and it also sort of became a way that we could check in and see how our community was coping and gain a bigger picture of how we were doing as a whole. I also recognised that we were going to experience this pandemic somewhat different to our metropolitan neighbours, and thought our story or experience was worth sharing to the wider audience. And, you know, in doing so and creating this series, I hope we've actually created a regional voice, which shows how we've coped throughout this COVID situation so far. And, you know, I think it's refreshing to see on social media something that's very authentic and genuine in amongst all the hysteria and stuff that the media has been tossing about. So basically, once I came up with the concept, I just had to let my higher powers know what I thought, get the approval. I then had to speak to our local police as to how I could go about interviewing community members while maintaining social distancing. And then I contacted a friend who is a media lady to gauge her thoughts about the idea, and she purchased some equipment so that we wouldn't have to mic anyone up. It looked like a furry wombat microphone stick that we had to use. so that we could maintain distance. And within a week or two later, we were out in the community filming, and it was coming up to Anzac Day, a very significant day of commemoration in our community, even out here in the outback. And, you know, it was the first community event where we knew things were going to unfold very differently. So that was our starting point and first crack of the whip for our COVID Chronicles. And I guess the rest is history, pun intended. So since then, we've covered topics of Anzac Day, Blackall drive-through flu jab clinic, where our local health services sort of got around the round table and worked out how were they going to immunise our community against influenza, because obviously we have over 65% of our population over 55. So that was a big concern for them, and we had a drive-through flu jab clinic. We interviewed our elderly, obviously our most vulnerable and our biggest proportion of the population. We interviewed our education department, relationships. We even captured a love story of a couple in our local nursing home that through lockdown, how they still kept in contact with each other. We also did a comparison to our Spanish flu, and we did that through working with our local historical society, and it was really interesting to sort of note that there was very few lived experiences and data collected back then, and which sort of gave more importance to why we were doing what we were doing now. Agriculture. So throughout all this, our community has been very lucky that our agriculture sector has still been able to continue. We run weekly cattle sales. That's kept our local economy, pushing through this. Every business in our street was basically essential, so all have remained open. So that's another interesting fact about Blackall. Just recently, last week, we dropped another edition covering our local businesses in both Blackall and Tambo. And the next one that we have planned is our social spirit. So all our community events and activities that have been impacted by COVID. So some of the impacts or outcomes that we've had from putting out our COVID Chronicles is we've had over 50,000 social media engagements with our posts. Obviously interest from State Library Queensland and Anne, and I guess this is an outcome, being invited to come and speak to all you lovely people. What we actually found was we became a listening ear for our locals. So in our heads, we had a few key questions that we wanted to ask in our interviews, and we thought, okay, 15, 20 minutes at the tops, and then we can move on to the next person. What we actually found, especially with our elderly, I guess they felt so confined from, being social distancing, that they wanted to sit there and chat forever. And our interviews went for, over an hour in some cases, and it was terrible to have to move on. But so, it was like that face-to-face social interaction that they really missed and appreciated through our chats. Our series has created a lot of community pride. I guess small towns are very interconnected. So as people saw their families and loved ones pop up on our COVID Chronicles, they were sharing, and, it just sort of went viral in that way in itself. And we hope we've created an oral history collection of the lived everyday experience of our community. Like I mentioned earlier, there's lots, there's data and there's statistics about, significant events that happen in our community, but, very rare circumstances, they've captured a lot of just the everyday lived experience. And, so I think that's really important that we've covered that element. Um, the Chronicles themselves have documented our community's coping mechanisms, and I guess it will become a toolbox for future pandemics or crises. You know, you can determine our characteristics and our cultural identity through these movies, and you know what our community values, and that really helps us come out the other side of this pandemic and in the future with what we need to do in our recovery phase to get through this. What we found, especially with our agriculture edition, was we really spotlighted rural Queensland, and we've highlighted the importance of our regional and rural communities and just how essential we really are to the food chain supply. And you know, throughout all this, we're obviously so essential that we've been able to continue operating through the pandemic. What I've also found from the COVID Chronicles going out on our social media platform is I've had a lot of our district support services and health authorities actually come in or ring up wanting guidance on what our community needs and you know what they need to do in the recovery phase, because they've seen that we've gathered such a snapshot of the feelings and the experiences of our community. And to wrap it up, if I don't feel privileged enough to give you all advice sitting in a virtual room full of researchers and historians, but it was such an organic process, the COVID Chronicles. My advice is to just do it. We didn't have time to get bogged down into what questions we should ask, who we should speak to. We just felt that it was needed in our community at the time. We're social creatures, and we just did it, and in the process we've unearthed a very organic and genuine collection of our community during COVID-19. And that's the COVID Chronicles. So I thank you all for listening, and that's my contacts. If anyone has any questions or wants to get in touch with me down the track, very open to helping you all. Thank you.
If I may interrupt here, Ellen, I've just sent an email to the wider local studies list detailing Jamie Lee's contribution to our Queensland Memory e-News and a direct link to all of the COVID stories on their community Facebook page.
I just have a question about what sort of equipment you actually use to film people.
So all we had was a camera mounted on a stand and the microphone, so that we didn't have to have physical contact with any of the people we were interviewing. Look, I will have to get my media lady to give the correct name. It was just referred to in the media world as the furry wombat. It was a microphone, a woolly microphone like a broomstick almost, and it was about 1.5 metres, so perfect for social distancing. But that was all we had, very basic. And then Kirsty from Mariki Media edited it. So it was fully grassroots, locally made with minimal equipment.
Cool. Great resource.
Excuse me, Ellen. There is no sound coming through from you.
Is that working? Sometimes you just have to toggle it and then kick it in the head. And I mean that nicely for these kinds of things. So my apologies. You missed my lovely blurb about Jamie Lee and how you must go and watch the COVID Chronicles. So go and watch the COVID Chronicles. Thank you so much, Jamie Lee. That was fabulous. Please join me in thanking Jamie Lee. We should do. Now, as you will have worked out, we're running to a slightly different schedule to the agenda. So I'm just wondering if people want to have a quick 2-minute stretch, and then we'll continue with the discussion of COVID-19 collecting and see how much of the other bit we get through. But I actually find it does help if you've been sitting in a video conference to have a quick 2-minute stretch. I won't make everyone do it together, but just we'll be back in literally, okay, I'm showing as 3:39. We'll be back at 3:41.